Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction, one story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Cup of Joe Show. I'm Joe, of course, and I'm really excited to have my guest here today, a friend of mine. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to have a conversation, and I know you're going to enjoy it. I've been looking forward to this one. So today we welcome Steve S. to the Cup of Joe Show. Steve has been sober since February 4th, 1996, marking an incredible 29 years of recovery. His home group is the Saturday morning book study at Park 40. Steve is a devoted husband, father of two, and proud bonus dad. His family continues to grow with 8 grandchildren and a beautiful great-granddaughter. Holy moly, Steve, great-granddaughter. He loves spending time with family and friends, traveling, staying active, enjoying sports, and diving into a good book. So please welcome my friend Steve to the show. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thanks. We just watched our great-granddaughter today, actually, so coming off of that natural high.
That's pretty cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us. So where did you grow up, Steve?
Okay, well, I kind of grew up in a lot of places. I was born in Oklahoma. My father was in the military at that time, and then moved to North Carolina in a couple different places, and then a couple different places in Virginia, and then moved to Connecticut when I was, I think, in 4th grade, and lived in Connecticut until I moved down here to Tennessee in 1994.
Oh, wow. So you spent, most of your growing up in Connecticut. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the grade school and high school years until 94, actually. So, yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was school like for you, and was there any things that stick out about school, or good, bad, or anything like that?
No, I remember. I think the probably the biggest change for me was when I moved from North Carolina and Virginia to to Connecticut. I remember feeling a little bit out of place because I was Southern and everybody there was obviously had a, but I think that was more in my mind than anything else. But, and I really enjoyed, I think one of the things I loved doing when I first got up there too was baseball cards were big back then when I was a kid.
Wow.
And we didn't just collect them. We had these little games that we would play. They were called Topsies and Noxies and Flingsies, Farsies. And what you would do is if you won one of those little events, you would collect the other person's cards. So and the good news, I had all these great cards, but the bad news was they're all damaged from the games.
Oh, geez.
I had some pretty good cards that would have been worth something if they hadn't gotten messed up.
Yeah.
But, anyway, and then growing up, when I first moved up there, I lived in a town called Farmington, Connecticut, and then in 8th grade moved to Granby, there's where I went to high school and beyond after that. So I lived in a place called Granby, Connecticut.
Okay. Well, how old were you when you took your first drink, Steve? Was that in high school or?
Yeah, no, I was 14 when I started smoking pot and 15 when I had my first experience with drinking.
Okay.
And that in and of itself is an interesting little story. I'd already been getting into trouble with some of my teenage friends in the neighborhood, And so in November of that year, and it was cold obviously up there, we had a half day of school, but we decided not to go. And I decided it would be a good idea to have 4 or 5 friends over, and we were going to raid my parents' liquor cabinet, which we did. And in order to be cunning and sneaking, I was worried that they were going to discover that the bottles had less alcohol in them. So we took big, tall glasses and just put a mixture of every kind of booze that was in there. You know? and it was horrible. I mean, we tried to drink it, but and then I had seen adults putting ice in their drinks, and I thought, well, maybe that'll help. And so, but we ended up, we drank them down, got really drunk. And then neither one of my parents smoke, but I got so drunk, I was letting kids smoke cigarettes in the house. One of my friends decided to go streaking, because streaking was big back then, and was running down the road naked. And his parents lived 2 houses down from us. And his mom saw him running down the road naked coming from the Smith house. So she called her husband up, who worked with my dad, and my dad called, and I remember that I was so drunk, but I do remember my dad asking me if I had been drinking, and my response was only a little bit. And so he told me to get all the kids out of the house, and he came home, and I had passed out, and that was back when I had hair, and so he was dragging me upstairs to my bedroom with my hair. I was grounded for a week, had to apologize to each person's family, their parents and everything. And so you would think that was my first experience, sick as a dog, first experience with alcohol. You'd think that I would have figured out that was not a good thing for me, but it took me a little while, a few more painful lessons along the way to learn that. So that's my first experience with drinking.
We'll call you Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Yeah, really.
Do you have any siblings, Steve?
Yep, I've got a younger sister. She's 4 years younger, and she too is a member of this program, and so she's been doing well in the teens anyway of years, and so that's something that we both share in common, having that problem, but also having a solution. So
yeah. So after high school, what did you do after high school?
Well, I will say this real quick too, in terms of family history. Sure. Both of my grandparents on my father's side were alcoholic. I didn't know it until I was older, but one of my uncles, I guess, was too, or whatever. And on my mother's side, I found out years later too that my grandmother had some issues as well on her side. So I had it on both sides of my family. But when I was in high school, by the time I was a sophomore, I was already just getting into all kinds of trouble and drinking a lot. And so my grades were horrible.
Right.
And couldn't go anywhere except to a community college, which I went for 1 year to a community college, took 30 credits, and came away with 7 credits of the 30 that I took. So after that, I ended up kind of just working at a pizza shop and a grocery store. My mother helped get me a job at an insurance company because I was a latchkey kid, which helped get me into all kinds of trouble too. But sure. And in that, working in that insurance company, I was the courier, and it was a small company, but I got to drive around and drop stuff off. And I remember the president of the company had to get a vasectomy, and so I had to drive him home to his house. And on the way home, I don't know why, I had something in the conversation with the guy. I just knew that I needed to do something for myself. So I went back to community college and then ended up going to did a year of that, and then graduated from Central Connecticut State University with a degree in marketing.
Oh, wow. So what was drinking like a continuous thing for you?
Oh, yeah. No question. I mean, going to college, I don't know how I managed to go through to get through school, at least the undergraduate stuff. And, it was a real, how it's a lot of hard work to try to drink
Sure.
successfully and go to school. But I did. And there's some stories I could tell about some of those stupid things that happened in college, but I certainly paid a price for my drinking.
Right.
Had some consequences, but that didn't deter me. So
Right. So, and then you graduate from
Mhm.
college, and
Yep.
you're still in Connecticut. Did
Mhm.
you continue school, or did you do what did you
Well,
do after that?
no, what I did was I actually met my ex-wife, my first wife, in college, um, and she was an alcoholic as well. So we had a really interesting relationship.
Sure.
But somehow we managed to both graduate from school, have two children. Uh, she had a good job working for a utility. I started working for Travelers Insurance, and tried to successfully drink and work and raise a family. And had periods of time when she was pregnant, she didn't drink, and I was trying to be the supportive husband, and I didn't drink either. But we would always, after the children were born, find ourselves drinking again, and those kinds of things, and a couple of car accidents on her part. I always tended. I think one of the things that I always did was compared myself to her, and I thought, well, I handle it better than she does, which
Right.
wasn't really true. But so, but then I went back to school too when I was working for Travelers, and I got an MBA, and somehow I managed to do that as well. Um, and then got an opportunity. I was working up in Hartford, Connecticut. Got an opportunity in '94 to come down to Knoxville, Tennessee. We were starting up a new operation down here, and the guy who was running it, I had worked a little bit with him, and he offered me a job to come down here, and so I accepted, and that's how it got us to Tennessee.
Okay. So that's it. That was in '94.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when you got here, um, was did drinking play a role in kind of the transition period, so to
Oh yeah.
speak?
Well, it was a difficult transition to come down here because the housing market had gotten really bad in Connecticut and so couldn't sell the house. And I spent 6 months down here in advance of family. I came home one time during that period of time, but I had a lot of fear going on about whether or not I was going to be able to do the job because it was a good opportunity. It was a big job, and I carried a lot of insecurity about it, and so I would, even drinking didn't help much. But I remember um, one Sunday afternoon, I would sometimes go into work because I didn't have much else to do, and and I can understand how somebody could get to the point of suicide. I wasn't going to do anything suicidal, but I certainly felt like that I was, I don't know if prison is the right word, but I had no escape. I felt like I had really messed up by taking this job, couldn't sell the house, and my anxiety level was just through the roof. And, I certainly can understand how somebody could get to that point, if it kept going.
Right.
But eventually got the house sold and the family moved down and moved into a neighborhood here. And immediately the people in the neighborhood were all about the same age. They all had kids that were, anywhere between 2 years old and 10. And there was parties every weekend in the neighborhood. And so we started doing that and
Right.
stuff like that. And it was, I remember going one time to World's Fair Park with the ex, and we went to see Hootie and the Blowfish, and had a great time at the concert. But of course, once you start drinking, uh, ended up going down to the Strip, and actually a couple of the guys from the band were in a bar down there. We went and saw them, and got home at like 2 a.m. and just horrible. I mean, just,
Yeah.
um, things like that. I mean, I remember trying to coach. I coached my son's little league team for a couple of years, and it was always a dilemma. On Friday night, how much could I drink and still
Yeah.
function Saturday morning to coach my son's team? And just it was very, very difficult to try to look really like you were okay, and going to church on Sunday mornings and being hungover. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, isn't it? To
Yeah.
do it really, looking back,
Yes.
it's amazing what we're willing to do to keep doing what we're doing.
Yep.
Yep. So what what was like a turning point for you, or what made you decide to maybe go get some help?
Well, there was in '96, in February of '96, I was out of town. We had an office, another field office up in Albany, New York. And so I was up there for a few days, and I was flying back. And if you were living down here, you might remember that time. That was a pretty bad snowstorm that right at the beginning of February. And the pilot, Knoxville Airport was open, but the pilot decided to divert to Charlotte. And so I got stuck in Charlotte for a couple of days. So I was there at a hotel right near the airport, drinking on the company's dime, padding my expense account, doing all kinds of unscrupulous things. But I remember I got home and the ex-wife and the kids were home, and people weren't able to go to school for a while because the roads were so bad. And but I remember finally, and this was one of these times too, after we had drank like all weekend and with people in the neighborhood, and just we both would say to ourselves periodically, we need to slow down. We need to do something here. This is not good. And so I came home from work, I think on a Tuesday, and I got home and was having dinner with the kids, and the ex-wife says to me, "Hey, I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting today at lunch." And I said, "Oh," I said, "Really?" and I said, "Well, tell me about it. What you do?" And so she described the meeting, and somebody had gotten her a book, and she said, and whatever she said to me must have sounded somewhat appealing or convincing, because I said to her, "Well," I said, "are you going back?" And she said, "Yeah, they tell you should come. You should, people need to come to meetings and stuff." And I said to her, I said, "Okay, well, I'll go with you to the next meeting." So that's what I did. And so that's how I got into AA.
That's pretty cool. That's you didn't go in as kicking and screaming as I did, Steve.
I know. Well, I mean, I had all the same kinds of consequences and stuff, and we had tried. I mean, at one point I think didn't drink for 2 years, and this was when I was still in Connecticut, and ended up going to on a bus trip to a Red Sox game, and went to a bar beforehand and decided it'd be a good idea to have a couple of beers at the deli there, and then the next weekend went to a wedding and got drunk and off to the races again. So, but I think though, and I don't know why, I felt when I went to the first meeting, it was on Friday night at Park 40, and I remember just feeling, just saying, gosh, how did I end up in AA?
Yeah.
And I felt like, of course, when you're in your first meeting, how everybody says you're the most important person in the room, and I figure everybody's looking at me and everybody's, judging me or whatever, and everything. I was nervous about that stuff. But what they did at that time was they would have in a smaller room in the back, they would have a first step meeting back there.
Okay.
So they took me in there, and there was about 7, 8 other people in that room. And so that was a lot more comfortable. And I just remember listening to people talk, and I started identifying with what they were saying. Immediately for me, identification was one of those big things where it's like, gosh, yeah, I did that, or this guy sounds like me, and there was no judgment, and everybody was, I remember that, then you got to pick up a white chip and stuff. And I did that. But I remember driving home from that meeting, and something on the way home, I just said, something about this feels right. I
Okay.
felt safe. I felt part of. So I immediately felt at home in AA for some reason. I don't know. That's God doing for us what we can't do for ourselves or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. And so then I just started attending meetings, and I fell into, there was a Monday and Wednesday night men's meeting. So I would go to those two meetings, and I'd go to the Saturday morning Big Book meeting, and those became my staple meetings and stuff. And I just, and I didn't consider it drudgery to have to go to a meeting. I enjoyed them, and just, I don't know, it felt like something I've been looking for all along, and I'd found it.
Yeah. That's really amazing. Well, what was it? Do you remember what those, like how you felt those first few months, Steve? I mean, just, I know
Yeah,
in a minute, but
no, I did. I mean, it was still an emotional roller coaster. I mean, I was still having a lot of trouble with how to deal with emotions. I didn't know how to deal with things when I got angry or fearful. But one of the beautiful things about AA too was I remember being in a men's meeting one night, and I said, that I'm asked to share about, and I just said to the guys, I said, look, I'm having a hard time. I said, I'm having a hard time with anger. I said, I don't know what to do with it. I get mad at my wife. I get mad at my kids. I get mad at stuff. And I'm just really struggling with it. And I remember a guy in the meeting who's still around and got 40 something years now. I mean, he's just in the like low 40s. But I remember he said to me, he said, Steve, he said, I really appreciate you sharing so honestly and opening up about what's going on with you. He said, because that gives the rest of us permission to do the same thing. And I thought, wow, there was no judgment. There was no, there was this kindness that emanated from the guy. And those guys just took me in. I mean, we would go across the street to Cracker Barrel or go to the soup kitchen and eat after every meeting. And I mean, it was like joining like a baseball team, and the veterans took the young rookie in, and come on, kid, and so I was just fortunate, I guess, that all those things fell in place like that. So,
I think that's, like you said, Steve, God doing for us what we can't do for ourselves, putting people in our lives, and when we're open to it, amazing things can happen.
Yeah.
So did the obsession to drink go away pretty quick, or was that something that took a while?
I don't know if I ever had like the word an obsession to drink, but I certainly thought about it. I mean, every time I would do something, in the real world, I would be thinking, oh, this is when I used to drink. Like I remember one of the guys in the meeting took me to my first UT football game, and he had season tickets, and he took me to a game, and I remember going in there, and I just remember how different it was, because I used to think that everybody in the stadium was drunk, and when I got in there, I was like, oh, most of them aren't, and I remember not having to smuggle a bottle. I would wear boots so I could smuggle it in the boot, and but I remember the game. The next day I wasn't hungover at church, had a great time and everything. But I was certainly aware. I remember, I'll give you one example too, where we were at one of the neighborhood parties, which I wouldn't recommend people do in early sobriety, but my ex-wife and I were kind of dumb and would still go to those things.
Yeah.
But we didn't drink, and I remember my son was 9 at the time, and my daughter was 5, when actually she was 7, I'm sorry, but I remember being at one of these parties, and I had just a glass of Coke or something, and my son comes up to me and he takes the drink out of my hand and he starts smelling it, and I looked at him and I said, Chris, I said, what are you doing? not in a mean way, but he
Yeah.
said, I just was checking, Dad. And I said, oh, I said, okay. I said, I said to him, I am so glad that you cared enough about me to do that. I said, it makes me feel really good that, you care, but I want you to know Dad's okay. I'm not doing that anymore. And that was a real nice, that was something that always stuck with me um, and everything too. So, just like I said, very aware of early on, these were, because it was like most of us who drink, it was like any activity I did was just an excuse to drink.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
go on vacation, drink, go to a ball game, drink, go
Yeah.
to, a wedding, drink, go to, drive down the street, drink.
Yeah. I know I became so convinced that I couldn't do any of these things without it.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And it was
that's
such a
just
part of
it's
my
the lies
social,
we tell ourselves.
yeah, such a part of my social
Yeah.
activity. So I identify with people that say when they're new, they say, oh gosh, how am I going to live without drinking? It's like, yeah, I understand, what that was like.
Yeah. Yeah. So you certainly you've been in recovery for quite a while. What are some of the experiences you've had in recovery that are
Yeah.
kind of wow
Meaningful
moments?
or, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember um, it was very, so, and I also later on, I worked at a treatment center for a while, but um, so when people are struggling with like getting a sponsor, I understand that struggle because I remember, oh God, asking somebody to sponsor me was really a very frightening thing because and my issue with it is that it's not that I didn't have an ego that told me I didn't need to do it. My issue was fear. I was afraid I was going to ask somebody and they were going to turn me down and my feelings would get hurt.
Right.
And so I was afraid of my feelings getting hurt. And there was a guy in the Monday night men's meeting who we jokingly refer to him. He ended up moving away. He went back to Atlanta where he's from. But his name was Billy. And we would refer to him as the BillyLama because he would always say like the funniest stuff. I mean, one of his expressions was, I remember he was in a meeting one time and he was talking about something and he said, he said he was talking about when he was still drinking. He said, I was at a gas station one day and he said, and I was getting gas and this hot girl goes into the gas station, comes out with a 6-pack and a pack of cigarettes, and I wanted all 3 of them. That's the kind of stuff you would say. Yeah. And anyway, but I finally got up the courage to ask Billy, and Billy, said, "Yeah, I'll do it." He said, "I want you to know," he said, "I'm not going to tell you to do anything." He said, "That's going to be up to you." He said, because you're only going to do what you want anyway. He said, so, but he said, but if you'll do this stuff, he said, I promise you things will get better. And he was good because, when I would call him on the phone and I hated, and I called a couple other guys too. And that was another piece of this I'll say is that I understand now why everybody tells you early on to pick up the phone, because, you got to get that muscle memory. You got to be able to do it. Because if you're not doing stuff like that, when you have a real problem, the odds are that you're not going to pick up the phone if it's not part of your regular routine. So, but I remember talking to Billy one night and I was working on my 4th step. And of course, like any good self-serving alcoholic and I didn't read the instructions. I didn't look at the book on how to do it. I just was sitting at a computer on Microsoft Word at the time, typing War and Peace. And, it was like, and it was cathartic, I guess is the word. It was cathartic in that sense of the word, because, I really put down a lot of stuff that had been going on in my life, especially stuff with my dad and everything. But I was talking to him on the phone one night about it, and I was in the still working on it phase. And Billy said to me, he said, well, he said, he said, until I did my fifth step, he said, all that stuff that was going on with me that was bothering me or holding me hostage, he said, it didn't hold the same power over me. He said, once I did my fifth step, he said, with my sponsor, he said, and he said, and also he said, and what I had to do with my sponsor, he said, was I had to pick a date with my sponsor to do it. And I was like, okay, I know what you're saying, Billy. Let's pick a date. So I picked, like 2 weeks out, and we went to a Monday meeting. And after the meeting, went over to McDonald's. And so I did my first fifth step with Billy at McDonald's. And I told myself that the things that I didn't want to talk about the most were the first things that were going to come out of my mouth. And the reason I did that was because I didn't want to give myself permission to procrastinate on it and find a way to not do it during the discussion. So, and so he's a great sponsor. I'll tell you one other real funny story about Billy. We were walking out of the meeting one night, and there was this guy at the meeting, and I was still pretty new, but his nickname, and this is going to sound horrible but this is real life. People used to refer to him as Bob the Hat. What's his name? And I didn't really know, but I was pretty sure that Bob really wasn't sober all the time, because he would do some pretty weird stuff. And so we walk out in the parking lot, and Billy says hi to Bob, and Bob says hi to him. And as we're walking away from Bob, Billy turns to me and says, he says, that's my sponsor. And I said, huh? And I looked at Billy, I said, Bob the Hat is your sponsor? And he didn't say anything. He let me twist in the wind for a couple seconds. And he said, yep. He said, some people teach me what to do. Other people teach me what not to do. He said, and I was like, damn, okay. So, he just had so many ways of saying stuff, and he was quite the character. So,
yeah. I can imagine you sitting there with Bob the Hat going, what?
Oh yeah. He came one time to a meeting wearing a dress with he looked kind of like that woman who was the one that was on the Grand Ole Opry that would wear the hat with the Minnie Pearl.
Minnie Pearl.
Yeah. He kind of looked like
I like old Minnie Pearl.
Yeah. So Bob was an interesting guy.
Yeah. Well, so what kind of, I know you're remarried, so you obviously have been through some tough times during your sobriety. How did you handle that type of situation?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, so I got sober in 96, and about a year and a half into sobriety, I was still working at Travelers Insurance at the time. I got another opportunity to move to Tampa, Florida. And this was another step up. And, and I was at that point being sober, I was really trying to, I was very career oriented and stuff like that. And so I took that job, moved the family down to Florida. And again, Billy gave me some really good advice. He said, look, he said, you're going to go to Florida. He said, it's going to be different. They're not going to do it the way you think they should. He said, but go down there and get connected right away. And I had a much better deal this time. I was home every weekend. So I'd work down in Florida, fly out on Monday mornings, fly back on Friday evenings. But while I was down in Florida, I went just tons of different meetings all over the place, just trying to find different meetings that looked like a good fit and everything. So by the time it was I don't know, maybe 3 months or so when the family moved down, I had already gotten connected down there and met my next sponsor down there, and his name was Bill, by the way, too, and really did a lot of in-depth step work with Bill. I mean, he was really big on that, and he was very, very helpful. And so then I was down there for 3 years, and we missed Tennessee a lot. The school system was very crowded down there, and just a different kind of lifestyle, and we liked Tennessee. So I had an opportunity to come back to Tennessee in 2000, which I took. So we moved the family back to Tennessee. And then in 2001, we went through a big corporate restructuring and downsizing. And so I lost my job. And that was tough. I mean, we decided we weren't going to move anywhere. We moved the kids around too much already. And, my son was getting ready to start high school and didn't want to do that. And so stayed in Knoxville. And had several interviews, but just didn't get the jobs. And so I ended up working for a small cell phone company for a while, heading up like their customer service stuff, and absolutely hated that job. It was just not a good environment. And and then that thing went belly up. So so the church I was going to at the time that we were going to was growing, and they needed a business administrator. So so they asked me, would I like to come on staff and be part of the business administrator? And so I, talked with family and said, yeah, I'd like to do that. And I will tell you, in all my years of recovery, I never financially, in terms of what I was doing when I was working at Travelers, got to that level again. But everything just worked out. I always had enough, more than enough. And right now, I won't get into the details, but I mean, I'd done well enough when I was working at Travelers to have stock options and stuff like that, which I exercised and owned. And so I've been fortunate from that standpoint that, financially, I've been in good shape. So, so anyway, then I ended up at the church, working there for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I want to come up for air here and give you a chance to say something.
No, you're good. I was just, and so, I was just, trying to think. So you've, moved and then moved back to Tennessee, lost your job, found your way. And then, how do you like kind of use what in recovery, what you've learned in recovery, like on a daily basis to, to get through your day, to kind of stay as peaceful as you can?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things I learned was, acceptance. I mean, I was working at that church for a couple of years or so, and they went through a nasty church fight, which is not something I would recommend anybody go through. Very painful. Well, because, you see a group of people and you see the brokenness of the human part of the condition, where it was a very, like I said, people were just very mean.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, I remember being kind of angry at God at that point, saying, well, gee, here I am doing your work, Lord. And I'm about ready to lose another job and everything. But I remember somebody saying one time, don't ask God why, ask God what. What is it you're trying to teach me? What are you trying to show me here? And I thought, that's, God must have something going on with this. So I remember being in a meeting at Park 40, and there was a guy at Park 40 who worked at Bradford in an IOP. And so I asked him, I said, hey, I've always felt a desire, because when I originally went to school, I was going to be a psychology major, but I changed to business because I figured I, needed to make some money, I guess. But he said, well, you can't work at Bradford unless you have a degree and, you're licensed and stuff. He said, but, if you go to Cornerstone, he said, this is a treatment center in town. He said, they hire people that don't have the degree to be counselors. And I said, oh, okay. So I went to Cornerstone, and it took me a while to kind of get in touch with different people, but I started volunteering. I started hanging out in the detox lounge and with the young adults, because they had a young adult program, and hang out with them 2 or 3 nights a week, and just be with them, and listen to them and show them some compassion, and then they hired me at Cornerstone, And so the first job I had there was I worked 16 hours a day on Saturday and 16 hours a day on Sunday and 8 hours a day on Wednesday. That was my schedule. So, I mean, I was 32 hours in 2 days over the weekend.
Yeah.
And as a counselor, and then I got on in the IOP, hired me as an IOP person. And again, you asked me what I learned in recovery. I learned to adapt to things. I mean, so it was like, okay. I remember they hired me as an intensive outpatient counselor, and I was getting ready I learned patience, because they had to replace somebody in another place, had replaced my job. And so I had to learn to be patient with that. And they said, well, look, we know we hired you for an IOP counselor, but we had a person leave in our support living, so we need you to do that.
Mm.
So I said, okay, whatever you guys need me to do. I learned flexibility. And I did that for about 3 months. And then they said, okay, now we got an opening in IOP for you. And we backfilled this support living job. And it was funny because I was originally supposed to be an evening IOP person, but they opened up for a day job. So I ended up right away, because everybody covets, the day jobs and stuff. I moved right into a daytime IOP counselor. And then, throughout stuff, still going to meetings on a regular basis, staying connected with a sponsor, just trying to stay spiritually fit. And so then I remember one of my mentors was the person who was in charge of all the aftercare program and the outpatient program and stuff. And she said to me, you should go back to school. And I said, really? And she said, yeah. She said, you should go get your master's in social work and get a degree in social work. And I said, I don't want to go for 4 years. I said, and she said, no. She said, you've already got an undergraduate degree. You got a graduate degree. She said, you can go right into UT's graduate program. In 2 years, you can, if you go full time, you get your degree. And I was like, oh, okay. So again, something that AA taught me was I'd learn to take things one step at a time. I said, okay, I don't have to do this right now, but I have to take the first step. I would take the first step, go find out what I needed to do, go do this, go do that, and just took each step. So a year into, I finished my first year. Actually, I finished, I don't know if it was a year or two, but I remember I was still in the middle of, I was working part-time at IOP and going to school part-time. And I came home, it was a Friday, and my ex-wife comes home. She'd just gotten, she had a really good job. She was a chief financial officer at a local architectural firm here in town. And the officers would get cars. And so she had a new car, and she came home and that Friday, and she was all excited about the new car. And then we come into the house, and she looks kind of serious, and she just sits down at the kitchen table with me, and out of the blue, she just goes, I don't think I love you anymore. And I was like, oh, really? Wow. And that was out of the blue. I mean, didn't see it coming. The kids were already out of the house at that point. And the way I approached it, though, was I remember just saying, okay, what's this going to be about? And so I asked her, I said, do you want some space apart? We tried, we went to 2 or 3 counseling sessions, and she said, well, I don't think they're doing any good. And I can tell you why, but so I ended up talking to people at Cornerstone, and they had halfway houses there that we owned. And I knew they had people manage those houses. And I said, I'd like to be able to do that. And I told my boss, what was going on at home. And they said, okay, but if you do that, you got to make a 3-month commitment. And, still married at the time, but I said, okay, I'll make that 3-month commitment. I'm not going to just go there. And during that time, it became apparent that things weren't going to work out with the wife. She didn't, I found out later on she'd already kind of found somebody. That's kind of what that whole thing happened.
Right.
But I remember my boss saying to me, this is the same one that told me to go back to school. She said, she said, you should ask her for the divorce. And I think what she meant by that is because that would be a healing thing for me. And I know that the ex-wife was concerned that the kids were going to blame her. And so I went to her one Saturday and I told her, I said, I think we should get a divorce. And she didn't protest.
Right.
So, but I was the one that called the kids. She was there in the room, but I took that on, that responsibility. And another thing I learned, in recovery too, was that initially my daughter was very angry with her, blamed her for it. And she would call and talk to me sometimes. My daughter would say, how angry she was with mom. And I would listen to her and I'd say, honey, I know you're a lot of feelings going on about this, but you need to talk to your mom about it too. I said, one of the things that I will say, and the ex was, in recovery too, is that we were not going to let this hurt the children. So we did everything we could to make sure that their life was not going to be as impacted as it already would have been, was going to be. And we did that. And I think, again, that was the program. That was God. I hold no ill feelings towards her. And she's remarried. I went to counseling after that too. I thought, okay, I'm actually in the field, but I also needed additional help. And so that was another thing.
Sure.
It taught me to ask for help. And one quick funny little story about that was I remember that I was going to say, okay, God, whatever you lead, I'm going to follow your lead. Your will, not my will, be done, right? And so I went to, again, my boss, who I really respected, and I said, hey, I think I need to go see a therapist. I said, can you recommend some names for me? And she wrote 3 names down on a piece of paper, and they're all women's names. And I didn't say anything, but in my mind, I thought, oh, hell, I don't want to go to a woman. I want to talk to a guy. I need to talk to a guy. And I remember walking out of her office, and I thought, how quickly did I take my own will back? Here I just said, I'm going to follow your will, God, and everything. I remember calling my sponsor on the phone and telling him, hey, Dave, I said, you're going to crack up over this. And he just laughed, and he said, but I did, I went and saw a therapist for like 1.5 years, and it was one of the best things I ever did. I had to grow in a lot of different ways that I would never have had to grow had that divorce not happened. And it really helped me, immeasurably. And I was, like I said, I'm remarried and going on 11 years now. And just to a wonderful, wonderful woman. She's an earth person. She's never had a drink, never even smoked a cigarette, doesn't ever want to have a drink, could care less, so, and she's just been a wonderful, wonderful person. So.
That's amazing. I have to put in a little tidbit, Steve, because you know this, but when that was going on in your life and you were managing one of the houses at the recovery facility, there was a guy who was still trying to get his crap together, who was on the last week of a 30-day stay, another tour of duty at, so to speak. And that was me. And I was actually in that house that you were in.
Oh no.
You were the manager of that house, and we were just punk. Wow.
I hope
I was an old guy. I was a juvenile delinquent at 42. No, we were, but you were not. You were the kindest. Amazing. I have to tell you that you were the kindest person.
Oh man.
And probably, you were just a model for what recovery can be. Now, I wasn't ready to receive any of it at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. But I remember you. Wow. And I remember how kind you were. It was just, they just threw us, they were trying to rotate us out to bring more people in.
Yes. Yeah.
and we were on our last several days, and I was in that house with you, and I just thought like, wow, I did not know. I had no clue. It's one of those things where you don't know what somebody is going through.
Yeah.
Here I am. I'm selfish, self-centered, thinking about, I've been sober for almost 30 days at that point, I guess.
Wow.
And I call it 30 days stupid. Anyway. And you were going through a pretty traumatic time in your life and a transition and doing it with dignity. And I remember you. I remember that. So anyway.
No, thank you for sharing that, Joe.
I wanted to tell you that.
That makes me, I always, as we know each other a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've always, you're one of those people that I just felt like a connection with in terms of, I just like you as a person. You just run into these people that you meet them and you like them. You say, I really like that guy as a person. You can't even put your finger on it. But anyway, it makes me even feel better about that. Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, Steve. And so let me ask you, now that you got your life all together, unlike me, but
no.
But what suggestions would you give to somebody who is listening to this and maybe struggling right now and needs, what can they do? What would be your suggestion of what they could do?
Wow. I guess it depends on where they are in their struggle. You know what I mean? But I guess is stick with it, and ask for help. I mean, it's hard to ask for help. Nobody likes doing it. I still, push back on doing it, my first thought or whatever, but it's okay to do that. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. I always tell people, because, if it was so easy, everybody would do it. No problem. But the fact that so many human beings, even non-alcoholics and addicts, have trouble asking for help, ask for help, stay connected, and just put one foot in front of the other, and try to be teachable and try to maintain a conscious contact with your higher power,
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Steve. And I can't let you go today without doing my rapid fire questions. And I still don't have a soundbite for it, so I have to do it manually. There's my rapid fire sound effect. But if you are ready, sir, I'm going to rapid fire you.
Okay.
All right, here we go. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
Oh, gosh. A day at a time.
Okay. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. It's, I guess, it's anytime somebody says something and they're just being placating, it's like they say some slogan for the sake of saying it. I can't pick one. It's more like who does it and how they do it. It's like, oh God.
No resentments there, Steve.
I know. I'm not judgmental at all. See?
So what do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Superpower. Oh gosh. I don't have one. I don't think. I think it's God does for us what we can't do for ourselves. So, but I guess maybe gratitude. I try to keep optimistic point of view.
Okay. If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Be kind to yourself. Be patient with yourself.
Okay. What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
I like all kinds of stuff. I mean, I listen to some really good Christian artists, but I like, our granddaughter is a huge fan of K-pop group called BTS, and we actually took her there to see him once, and So, I mean, I love a lot of music in general. I mean, you know.
Okay. If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
To be more others focused or others centered.
Okay.
To be able to do that better.
What step do you love the most?
Third and the 10th.
What step do you love the least?
Oh gosh. Probably the 5th.
What is your favorite curse word?
I remember that when I listened to this before, and I was going to say, I like them all.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome home.
It would be nice, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time today, Steve.
Thank you.
I just had, like you said, we have a connection, and maybe it was that secret connection. I don't think there are any coincidences. So I'm really grateful to have you in my life these days, and to be actually to be able to maybe give a little back. Back then I was pretty much a taker. Now I think I try to do a little better than that. So, but thank you for joining me on the show today.
I will say this one thing about you, Joe. You are definitely not a taker. You are somebody that that I look to as a person who has some qualities that I like to have more of. And so you are a fine example of recovery, my friend.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you, Steve. And I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks, man.
Don't forget, we release a new episode every Thursday at noon. You can listen to the show on your favorite podcast apps, Amazon Audio, Apple Podcast, Podbean, Spotify, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." There's lots of Cup of Joe shows, but there's only one The Cup of Joe Show. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Steve, thank you so much. And folks, thank you for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's Experience, Strength, and Hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.